The year was 1885, and the smell of burning pine wood drifted through the mountain air as dusk fell over the mining town of Willow Creek. It was a lonely speck on the edge of the Nevada desert, surrounded by rugged hills where fortunes were buried deep in the rock and men either found gold or lost their souls trying. Lanterns flickered along the wooden walkways, casting soft golden light over the muddy street. Horses snorted outside the saloon, and the faint sound of a piano carried through the night wind. In a world carved by calloused hands and stubborn hearts, nothing came easy, especially love. Inside a dimly lit cabin at the edge of town, the fire crackled and threw amber shadows across rough-hewn walls. He stood there, a rich miner whose fortune had made him both desired and feared. His hands bore scars of the earth, his shoulders broad from years of labor. Yet his voice carried the kind of quiet power that drew people near without effort. He had spent half his life digging through stone for gold, and the other half learning that some treasures couldn't be bought. Across the fire sat a young woman, her dress simple but her eyes filled with questions she didn't dare speak. The warmth of the fire glowed on her face, and though she tried to hide it, her heart beat faster when his gaze met hers. "I need a secret recipe," he said with a teasing grin, his tone low and rough from years of dust and whiskey, "to make you mine tonight." She looked up, startled, unsure if he meant it or if it was just his way of stirring her heart the way he stirred his molten gold. He leaned closer, his hat shadowing his eyes, yet his stare burned through the half-light. He wasn't like the other men who swaggered through the saloon or boasted about their finds. There was a strange tenderness behind his confidence, something that felt dangerous only because it was real. She didn't answer, not at first. Words seemed too fragile in a place where silence carried more truth. Outside, the wind howled through the valley, brushing against the old boards of the cabin. The sound was haunting, like the echo of forgotten stories buried beneath the mines. She broke the silence at last, her voice trembling slightly. "And what if there is no recipe for that?" she said. "What if some things aren't meant to be mixed?" He smiled faintly, resting his calloused hand on the table between them. "Everything's got a recipe," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "You just have to know what you're willing to trade for it." In that moment, she felt the weight of every secret she carried. She wasn't just a stranger wandering into town. She had come to Willow Creek searching for something she could never tell. A reason tied to a letter folded inside her pocket, worn from too many readings. The letter spoke of gold, of land, and of a man who might have known her father before the war. But she hadn't expected to find him like this, alive, magnetic, and unreadable as the mountains themselves. As the night deepened, the firelight revealed traces of his life, a pickaxe propped by the door, a half-finished map on the wall, sketches of tunnels that twisted into the earth. He had built his wealth with his own hands, but the loneliness that came with it was carved into his face as deeply as the lines of time. He poured 2 cups of coffee, the bitter scent filling the air, and slid one toward her. "You came all the way up here alone," he said quietly. "That's not something women from the valley do without a reason." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe I was chasing a rumor." He leaned back in his chair, studying her as if he could read the story she was too afraid to tell. "Rumors built this town," he said softly. "But they can tear a soul apart just as fast." The logs popped in the fire, sending sparks into the air. Shadows danced across their faces, and for a long time neither spoke. The silence between them was thick with questions, about trust, about truth, about the cost of what they both seemed to want. He finally rose and walked toward the window, pushing aside the curtain to glance out into the dark. "You know," he said without turning, "people come here for gold, but what they're really looking for is something to fill the emptiness." She lifted her eyes toward him, feeling something stir in her chest, a mix of fear and fascination. "And what about you?" she asked. "What are you looking for?" He turned slowly, the firelight catching his features. "Maybe I already found it," he said. His voice was soft now, almost a whisper, but it carried the kind of certainty that made her heart skip. "I just haven't figured out how to keep it." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the world outside that cabin was hard and unforgiving. Men like him didn't make promises, they made deals. And she knew that love, in a place like Willow Creek, could be more dangerous than any mine shaft. Yet as he took a slow step toward her, she felt something break inside the walls she had built around herself. Maybe it wasn't gold she had come searching for. Maybe it was this, a fire that could warm even the coldest part of her past. The wind blew again, stronger this time, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a horse neighed, followed by the echo of boots crunching on frozen ground. He froze for a second, his eyes narrowing. "Did you hear that?" She nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "Someone's out there." He moved quickly to the shelf and grabbed the old rifle leaning against the wall. The sound of metal sliding into place filled the room. "Stay here," he whispered. Her breath came shallow as he stepped toward the door, the fire casting his shadow long across the floorboards. For a moment everything was still. The flames, the air, even time itself. Then, just as his hand touched the latch, a knock echoed through the wooden door. It wasn't the heavy pounding of a drunk or a miner. It was a single, deliberate sound. Once, twice, then silence. He looked back at her, and in that silent exchange, 100 unspoken fears passed between them. Whoever was outside knew something, maybe about her, maybe about him, maybe about the secret they hadn't yet confessed even to themselves. The night pressed closer around the cabin, and the air smelled of smoke and danger. She rose slowly, unable to stop herself, and whispered, "Don't open it." He gave her a faint smile, that same teasing curve of his lips from before, but now it held something darker. "You said there's no recipe for this," he murmured, his hand tightening on the latch. "Maybe we're about to find out." The door creaked open an inch, and the firelight spilled out into the night, catching the edge of a shadow standing in the snow. For one long heartbeat, everything in Willow Creek seemed to hold its breath. The wind stopped, the fire stilled, and only the sound of her pulse filled the room. Then a voice, low, unfamiliar and cold, spoke from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "Not tonight." And in that single moment, the rich miner and the woman realized that whatever had drawn them together wasn't just fate or desire. It was danger waiting to unfold, and the night had only just begun. The miner stood frozen at the door, his silhouette outlined by firelight. The stranger's words hung in the air, cold and heavy as the winter wind that seeped through the cracks. She could barely breathe as she watched his hand tighten on the rifle. The fire crackled behind her, its warmth doing little to chase away the chill creeping through her veins. Whoever was outside seemed to know them, perhaps too well. The door opened another inch, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. No face, no footsteps, just the echo of a warning that didn't belong to a stranger. He stepped outside cautiously, the wood groaning beneath his boots. The air smelled of snow and smoke, and the valley stretched silent under a moon half hidden by clouds. She stood a few paces back, her fingers pressed to her lips, fighting the urge to call him back. He moved slowly, sweeping his gaze across the shadows. But by the time he reached the gate, there was no one, only a set of faint footprints leading toward the mine road, swallowed by the fog. He cursed under his breath and returned inside, closing the door firmly behind him. "It's fine," he said quietly, though his voice betrayed the unease he was trying to hide. "Could have been a drunk from town." But she could tell he didn't believe that. Neither did she. The way that voice had spoken, calm, certain, and knowing, had not sounded like any drunk miner. It was as if whoever it was had come to deliver a message. He set the rifle down and poured himself another drink, his hands steady but his eyes distant. The silence stretched between them until finally she spoke. "You know who it was, don't you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared into the fire, as if the flames might burn away the truth he'd buried years ago. "Some debts don't stay buried," he murmured. "Even when you pay in blood." She wanted to ask what that meant, but something in his tone warned her not to press. The story behind those words was buried deep, maybe deeper than the gold veins that made him rich. Instead, she turned her eyes to the window, watching the snow begin to fall in soft, slow flakes. The night had gone still again, but it no longer felt safe. The miner leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You never told me what brought you here," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "You've been careful not to." Her stomach knotted. She hadn't meant to hide the truth, but she couldn't bring herself to speak it either. The letter in her pocket felt heavier than ever, as if it carried all the weight of her past. "I told you," she said softly. "I was looking for someone." "Someone who owed you?" he asked. She shook her head. "Someone who owed my father." That caught his attention. He sat forward, eyes narrowing slightly. "Your father," he repeated, almost as if testing the word on his tongue. "Was he a miner?" "He was," she said. "Or he used to be. Before the war. He came out here once, worked these hills. Said the ground near Willow Creek hid something more valuable than gold. But he never told me what it was." He studied her quietly, and she could see thoughts moving behind his gaze like shifting rock. "What was his name?" he asked. She hesitated. "I think you already know," she said finally. "That's why you're uneasy tonight." He didn't deny it. Instead, he exhaled slowly, setting his cup down with a dull thud. "Your father was a good man," he said. "One of the few who didn't sell his soul to the mine. But he made enemies, same as I did." Her heart pounded. "You knew him?" "I did," he said quietly. "And if that voice outside means what I think it does, then someone else did too. Someone who never forgave either of us." The fire popped, a spark leaping up like a heartbeat between them. Outside, the snow thickened, coating the world in silence. He rose and began pacing slowly, his boots dragging faintly against the floorboards. "Years ago, before the town took root," he said, "this land was nothing but wilderness. Men came chasing gold and found death instead. Your father and I worked a vein deeper than any had gone before. It was said the earth there whispered, that it swallowed the greedy and spared only those who listened. We found something once, something that shouldn't have been touched." She frowned, her curiosity pushing past her fear. "What was it?" He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter now," he said. "All that matters is that someone wants it back." Her pulse quickened. "And they think you still have it?" "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe they think your father told you where it was before he disappeared." She froze. The letter. The map hidden inside it. The way the words had been written like a riddle. "Follow the shadow where the river meets the sun." She had assumed it was just an old man's poetry, a dying father's way of saying goodbye. But what if it was more? What if he had left her something dangerous, something people would kill to find? He must have seen the realization dawn in her eyes because his expression softened. "You're not safe here," he said. "If they followed you, they'll come again." She shook her head, refusing to yield to fear. "Then you're not safe either," she said. "If they want what he found, they'll come for both of us." He stepped closer, the firelight catching the hard line of his jaw. "You don't understand," he said. "I can handle danger. I can handle men. But I can't handle you walking into this without knowing what it costs." Her voice trembled, but she met his gaze. "Maybe I already paid my part," she said. "I lost everything when my father never came back from these hills." For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of snow against the window. Then he turned away, staring into the fire again. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we'll ride to the ridge. There's a place your father used to talk about. If there's truth in that letter, it'll be there." She nodded, though her heart was heavy with fear. The idea of venturing into the mountains, into whatever secret her father had died for, felt both reckless and inevitable. The miner began packing quietly, rifle cartridges, a lantern, a small sack of dried meat. His movements were steady, practiced, like a man preparing for more than just a journey. She sat by the fire, watching him, realizing how much of his life was built on silence, the kind that hides pain, the kind that builds walls higher than any mine shaft. As the flames flickered lower, he paused and glanced at her again. "If I don't make it back," he said, his tone half joking but his eyes too serious for laughter, "you'll know the recipe I was talking about wasn't just words." She tried to smile, but it caught in her throat. "And what recipe is that?" "The one that makes something worth holding on to," he said softly. "Even when the world tries to take it away." The night deepened. She couldn't sleep, not with the sound of the wind scraping against the walls and the knowledge that danger lay somewhere beyond that door. She rose quietly and walked to the window. The snow had stopped, and the moonlight painted the valley in silver. She thought she saw a figure near the tree line, still, waiting. But when she blinked, it was gone. Behind her, the miner stirred, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle even in sleep. She turned back toward him, her chest tightening at the sight. He looked peaceful for once, like the firelight had softened the years of toil etched into his face. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this night, this fragile moment of warmth and fear would stay with her forever. And as the last log cracked in the hearth, she finally whispered to herself, "Whatever secret he's keeping, it's tied to mine." Outside, unseen by both of them, a lone rider waited at the edge of the woods, his breath clouding in the cold air. The horse stamped nervously, its hooves leaving deep prints in the snow. The rider turned toward the cabin's faint glow, adjusting the brim of his hat. In his gloved hand, he held a small, crumpled paper, the same kind of letter she carried in her pocket. Only his bore different words. The miner thought the past had buried its secrets beneath the mountain. But as dawn began to stir behind the hills, the truth was already on its way back to claim them both. The morning came slowly over Willow Creek, painting the hills in a pale gold haze. The miner saddled his horse outside while she packed what little she owned, a wool shawl, a flask of water, and the letter her father had written. The silence between them was thick, not of resentment but of unspoken worry. The stranger's warning still echoed in both their minds, and though neither said it aloud, they both knew that day would change everything. The frost clung to the grass, and the sky carried a stillness that only comes before trouble. They rode out just as the sun rose over the ridges. The air smelled of pine and cold iron. The town shrank behind them, and the sound of the stream beside the trail filled the quiet. She could feel his watchful eyes on every shadow, every broken branch along the road. He wasn't just a man chasing ghosts. He was someone who had lived too long with them. She wanted to ask about the stranger again, about what had been found in that cursed mine years ago. But every time she opened her mouth, the words froze on her tongue. By midday, they reached the edge of the old mining path. It twisted upward through cliffs scarred with pickaxe marks and abandoned carts. The place felt haunted by the dreams of men who once thought the earth would give them everything. He dismounted and knelt near a half-buried rail track, brushing away the dirt. "This was your father's last claim," he said. "The others left when the tunnel collapsed. Only he came back one more time." Her eyes scanned the mountainside, feeling the weight of his words. "And you were with him?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "We both made it out, but not before something strange happened down there." She waited, sensing there was more. He stared at the dark mouth of the tunnel, its timbers rotted and broken. "The deeper we went, the louder it got. Not just the echo of picks or rockfall. It was like the mountain itself was breathing. Your father said he could feel it too. We found gold veins running pure as light, but mixed in with them was something else, a mineral we'd never seen before. It pulsed when you touched it like it was alive. We should have left it alone." Her throat tightened. "And you didn't." He shook his head. "No miner ever does. He took a piece. Said he'd hide it till the world was ready for it. But people saw. Word spread. That's when the accident started. The cave-ins, the fires, the disappearances. He left Willow Creek to keep it safe. I stayed to bury the rest." The wind whistled through the rocks, making the old beams creak. She looked toward the collapsed entrance and felt something deep in her chest. A faint vibration, as though the mountain still remembered. She pulled the letter from her coat and unfolded it. The ink had faded, but the words glowed faintly in the morning light. "Follow the shadow where the river meets the sun." He studied the letter carefully, his jaw tightening. "That's not about gold," he said. "It's a direction. The river runs east of here, and at sunset, its shadow touches the ridge near Eagle's Pass. If he left something behind, that's where it'll be." Before she could reply, a distant sound echoed through the canyon, the sharp crack of a rifle. The horses snorted and reared, their breath misting in the cold air. He pulled her down behind a boulder, just as another shot split the silence. The bullet struck the ground where she'd been standing seconds before. "Stay down," he hissed, loading his rifle with practiced speed. Through the fog, two riders appeared on the ridge above them, their faces hidden by scarves. They moved like hunters, silent and precise. One of them dismounted and began making his way down the rocks, using the shadows for cover. The miner fired once, the sound booming through the valley, and one of the riders ducked out of sight. The other returned fire, the bullet grazing the stone beside his head. She clutched the letter tightly, her heart racing. "Who are they?" "Men who think that stone your father found still has value," he said, eyes locked on the ridge. "And they're not wrong." They crawled behind the rocks toward the narrow stream that cut through the canyon. The air was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and dust. He fired again, covering their movement, then motioned for her to follow the water downstream. She stumbled over the wet stones, her boots slipping, but he caught her arm each time she fell. His grip was strong, unyielding. Even in danger, he never let her go. When they finally reached the tree line, he pulled her close behind a fallen log. "They'll circle around," he said. "We can't go back to the cabin. We need to lose them in the forest." She nodded, her breath unsteady. The cold seeped into her bones, but adrenaline kept her moving. As they made their way deeper into the woods, she noticed something strange. Patches of earth that shimmered faintly under the sunlight, as if dusted with fine gold. It wasn't natural. The miner noticed too. He knelt, pressing his fingers into the soil. "It's spreading," he whispered. "The same mineral. It's leaking through the ground again. She stared at him. You mean it's alive? He didn't answer. The look in his eyes said enough. Whatever her father had unearthed wasn't just a discovery. It was a curse. By nightfall, they found an abandoned cabin at the edge of the forest. The roof sagged and the windows were cracked, but it was shelter. Inside, they lit a single lantern, its weak glow flickering across the dusty walls. She collapsed by the hearth, exhausted, while he kept watch by the door. You should rest, he said quietly. And you? He smiled faintly. Men like me don't sleep easy. She studied him in the dim light. The way his jaw tensed when the wind howled. The way his hand stayed near the rifle even when he spoke softly. You're afraid, she said. He didn't deny it. Not for myself, the lantern hissed, casting shadows that danced across their faces. She wanted to believe they could find whatever her father had hidden and end this, but deep down, she sensed the truth. It wasn't just about a secret or a treasure. It was about something older, something that had been waiting to be found. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their tracks. The forest grew quiet, except for the faint rustle of branches. But beyond the silence, there was another sound, a rhythmic thud, distant but steady, like footsteps in the snow. He rose, rifle in hand, and peered through the cracked window. We're not alone, he whispered. She stood beside him, her heart pounding. Is it them? No, he said after a moment. This one rides alone. A single figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked and hooded, carrying a lantern that swung like a dying star. The rider dismounted and tied his horse to the fence. The miner's face hardened as the stranger stepped into the faint light. It's him, he said quietly. The one who used to lead the claim. She looked at him, confused. The foreman? I thought he died in the collapse. He did, the miner said grimly. Or should have. The door creaked open slowly and the figure stepped inside, snow clinging to his coat. His eyes were pale, almost glassy, and his voice carried a strange calm. You shouldn't have come back here, he said. The earth remembers. The miner kept his rifle steady. And yet you did. The stranger's gaze turned toward her. The daughter, he murmured. So he told you where it sleeps. She took a step back. Told me what? He smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. The heart of the mountain. The stone that breathes. It's waking again. The wind howled through the cracks in the cabin, snuffing out the lantern. For a heartbeat, everything went black. Then faintly, a red glow began to pulse through the floorboards beneath their feet. Slow, rhythmic, like the beat of something alive deep within the earth. And as the miner pulled her back toward the door, she finally understood. Whatever her father had left behind wasn't buried treasure. It was a secret that had been waiting in the dark, and now it was calling them home. The cabin trembled as the red glow spread across the floor, bleeding through the cracks like fire beneath glass. She clutched the edge of the table for balance, her pulse racing as the light pulsed with slow, living rhythm, almost like breathing. The miner's hand tightened around the rifle, his knuckles white. The stranger stood motionless, his face ghostly in the flickering light. His eyes, pale and hollow, seemed to reflect the same pulse coming from beneath the earth, as though something deep inside him recognized it. The air grew hot, thick, alive. What is it? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The miner's voice came out low and hoarse. It's the same thing your father touched. The same thing he swore to bury. The stranger took a step forward. He didn't bury it, he said softly. He fed it. Before she could ask what he meant, a thunderous crack shook the cabin. Dust rained down from the rafters. Outside, the trees groaned, their roots twisting as the ground beneath them shifted. The stranger's expression didn't change. It's waking, he murmured, and it remembers the ones who broke its sleep. The miner pointed the rifle toward him. Talk, he growled. What do you know? I was there the night it was found, the stranger said. Your partner thought it was gold. Your father thought it was life, and I knew it was neither. That stone, whatever it is, doesn't belong to men. It's older than the mountain itself. When it was taken from the ground, it didn't die. It waited. The words hung between them, heavy and cold. The red glow faded for a moment, and the silence that followed was almost worse. Then, from deep below, a low rumble rose through the earth like a heart beginning to beat after a long sleep. She stepped closer to the miner, gripping his arm. We have to go, she whispered, but he didn't move. His eyes were locked on the floor, where the glow pulsed faintly again, as if responding to something in him. It's calling, he said under his breath. It knows me. The stranger's eyes narrowed. That's because you carried a piece of it once. You think you buried it all, but part of it stayed with you. The miner turned sharply toward him. You're lying. The stranger shook his head. No, that's why it never stopped haunting you. Why the mine never stayed silent. You were marked the moment you touched it. The wind slammed against the cabin walls, rattling the window shutters. She could feel it too now, a hum in the air, faint but alive, as if something vast beneath their feet was breathing through the earth. She thought of her father, of the last letter he'd sent, the one she'd read 100 times. The shadow will guide you, but beware what follows it. She had thought he meant the path. Now she understood. He meant the thing that lived beneath it. We can still stop this, she said quickly. If we find where it's buried, maybe we can seal it again. The stranger looked at her for a long moment. You don't stop it, he said softly. You feed it or it takes. The miner raised the rifle higher, anger burning through the fear. You're not making sense. Oh, I am, the stranger said calmly. You'll see when we reach the pass. It's already opened the path. Your father left it waiting for you both. Before anyone could respond, another violent tremor shook the ground, sending cracks spidering across the cabin walls. The lantern crashed to the floor, the flame snuffing out. The red light from beneath grew stronger, illuminating their faces with an otherworldly glow. Outside, the forest began to twist, the trees leaning inward as if drawn toward the heart of the mountain. Mount up, the miner said sharply. We ride now. They ran into the cold night, their breath turning to frost. The snow had stopped, but the wind carried a strange sound like a chorus of whispers rising from the ground. The horses reared nervously, their eyes wide and glassy. The stranger followed, silent, leading his own horse by the reins. The air shimmered faintly, as if the night itself was bending around them. They rode hard through the forest, the path barely visible under the half-moon. The red light flickered in the distance now, glowing faintly from the direction of Eagle's Pass. She rode close behind the miner, her hands gripping the reins tight enough to hurt. The letter pressed against her chest, its words burned into her mind. The miner didn't speak, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he looked toward the horizon like a man bracing for judgment. As they reached the ridge, they saw it, an opening in the mountain that hadn't been there before. The rock had split apart, forming a jagged wound that pulsed faintly with crimson light. The air shimmered above it, hot and cold all at once. The stranger dismounted first, staring into the chasm with a look of grim recognition. It's awake, he said. The same heartbeat, the same hunger. The miner dismounted, his boots crunching on the snow. If your story's true, he said slowly, then it's time to finish what we started. The stranger gave a low, humorless laugh. You think you can kill what's already part of you? She stepped forward. Then how do we stop it? The stranger looked at her for a long moment, then at the miner. One of you has to give it back what it lost. The wind howled across the ridge, tearing at their coats. The miner frowned. What does that mean? You'll know when it calls for you, the stranger said quietly. It always calls the one it remembers. The miner's jaw tightened. He turned to her and took her hands, his voice low and rough. If anything happens, you ride back to town. Don't wait for me. I'm not leaving you, she said fiercely. This isn't a choice, he said. You don't understand what it's capable of. I saw what it did to your father, her breath caught. You saw him die? He hesitated, and in that pause she already knew the answer. He didn't die in a cave-in, did he? She whispered. The miner looked away. He made a trade. He gave himself to seal it. The only reason this mountain slept this long is because of him. Her knees weakened, the truth cutting through her like wind through cloth, and now it wants another. Before he could speak, the ground split open beneath them, sending them sprawling. The red light blazed upward in a violent burst, casting the mountainside in a crimson glow. The sound that followed wasn't human. It was deep, ancient, and filled with hunger. The horses screamed and bolted into the darkness. The air burned hot, tasting of metal and stone. The miner grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a rock. Stay behind me, he shouted. The stranger stood in the open, his arms raised as if welcoming the light. It's too late, he yelled. It's already chosen. From the chasm rose a column of red mist that swirled and pulsed, forming shapes that looked almost human but melted away before they could take form. The earth shook, and with each tremor, memories seemed to bleed into her mind. Images of men digging, fire spreading, screams echoing through tunnels. She saw her father, face streaked with ash, pressing a glowing stone into the ground as the walls collapsed around him. and she saw another man beside him, the miner, pulling him away, refusing to leave. The vision vanished as quickly as it came. She gasped, the cold air slicing her lungs. The miner turned toward her, his face pale. "You saw it too?" he asked. She nodded, trembling. "It remembers you both." The stranger's voice rose over the wind. "Now it remembers what it lost." The red mist began to twist into a vortex, pulling debris and snow into its center. The sound of rushing wind grew louder, almost deafening. The miner tried to steady his rifle, but the pull was too strong. She grabbed his arm, trying to hold him back. "Don't," she cried. "It wants you to go closer." He looked at her, torn between fear and resolve. "If I don't go, it'll take everything," he said. "This mountain, the town, you." The glow brightened until the whole valley seemed aflame. The stranger stumbled forward, shouting something she couldn't hear, his voice lost to the roar. Then the ground beneath them cracked again, opening into a deep fissure. She screamed as she felt herself slipping, but the miner caught her hand at the last second, holding on with every ounce of strength left in him. "Don't let go," she cried, tears streaking her face. He looked into her eyes, the red light reflecting in his, and whispered, "That's not how this story ends." The wind roared, the mountain trembled, and the red light surged like a living wave ready to swallow them both. The last thing she heard was the sound of the miner's voice, steady, calm, and resolute, as he said, "If it wants a heart, it'll have to take mine." And then the light burst outward, drowning the world in crimson. The blast of light swallowed the ridge, turning the snow to molten gold for one fleeting second before everything went dark. The roar of the mountain faded into silence. When she opened her eyes again, the air was still, heavy with the smell of ash and rain. The sky had turned gray, and flakes of dust floated through the air like lost feathers. She lay on the cold ground, her body trembling, her ears ringing. For a long time she couldn't remember who she was or where she had come from. Then the memory struck, his voice steady and sure, whispering, "If it wants a heart, it'll have to take mine." Her breath caught. She pushed herself up, pain shooting through her arms, and looked around. The ridge was gone, replaced by a hollow scar in the earth. The chasm had sealed itself, the once blazing light now nothing but faint smoke rising from the cracks. The stranger was nowhere in sight. The horses had vanished too. Only silence remained, broken by the faint echo of wind moving through the rocks. She called his name once, twice, but no answer came back. For a moment she thought he was gone forever. But then she saw it, a faint shimmer at the center of the hollow, like sunlight trapped beneath the earth. She stumbled toward it, slipping on the loose gravel until she reached the spot where he had stood. There, half buried in the dirt, lay a single stone, smooth, round, and pulsing softly with warmth. She knelt beside it and pressed her fingers against its surface. The warmth spread through her hands, through her heart, filling her with a strange calm. In that warmth she heard him, not his voice exactly, but something deeper, like a memory that belonged to her now. "It's done," the whisper said. "The mountain sleeps again." Tears welled in her eyes. She held the stone close to her chest, her body shaking as she whispered, "I'm not letting go of you. Not again." The wind stirred gently, brushing her hair across her face like a hand. It felt almost human, almost like him. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The valley below was quiet again, untouched by the chaos that had nearly destroyed it. The trees stood still, the snow untouched except for her footprints. She gathered what strength she had left and made her way down the slope, carrying the stone in her shawl. The path was long and steep, and more than once she stumbled, but the thought of his voice guided her onward. By the time she reached Willow Creek, the first signs of life had returned. Smoke rose from the chimneys, and miners moved through the streets unaware of what had happened above them. She walked through the center of town, her clothes torn, her face streaked with soot, but no one stopped her. They looked up only briefly, then went back to their work, as if some instinct told them this was not a story they wanted to know. She went to the edge of town, where the small church overlooked the river. There, beside the frozen water, she dug a hole in the soft ground and placed the stone inside. For a moment she hesitated, her hands hovering above it. "You said every recipe has a price," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hope you found your peace wherever you are." Then she covered it with soil and pressed her palm to the ground. The warmth faded slowly, leaving only stillness behind. As the weeks passed, winter began to lift its hold on Willow Creek. The snow melted into the river, carrying the last traces of ash away. She stayed in the town, living in the small cabin that once belonged to him. She rebuilt it, piece by piece, fixing the walls, mending the roof, keeping the fire burning each night. Sometimes she would sit by the window and talk softly to the flames, telling him about the day, about the miners, about how quiet the nights were now. No one ever came asking about the mine again. The trail to the ridge disappeared under wild grass, and people began to say the mountain had gone dead, but she knew better. She could still feel its slow, steady heartbeat beneath the ground, no longer angry, just resting. One morning in early spring, she rode out to the ridge one last time. The trees were blooming, and wildflowers had started to grow along the path where the earth had split months before. She dismounted near the old marker stone and stood there in silence. The air was peaceful, and for the first time since that night she felt something close to hope. She knelt and touched the ground where the light had once burned brightest. Beneath her fingers she felt a faint hum. Not the dangerous pulse it had been before, but something softer, almost like a heartbeat answering hers. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You gave it your heart." The wind blew gently through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and river water. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, circling high above the cliffs. She closed her eyes and let the sound sink into her. The world had gone back to its rhythm, and she realized now that some stories weren't meant to end. They were meant to settle quietly into the earth, to live as echoes in those who survived. That evening, she returned to the cabin and lit the fire. The same chair he had once sat in still stood by the hearth. On the table, she placed a small tin cup, the one he had used every night. She poured coffee into it, even though no one would drink it, and sat across from it with her own. "You said you needed a secret recipe to make me yours," she said softly, smiling faintly through the ache in her chest. "Turns out it was never about words. It was about everything you gave up." The flames danced gently, and in their light, she thought she saw his reflection for a moment. Broad shoulders, tired eyes, that quiet grin that always made her heart stop. She reached out instinctively, but it faded before her hand touched it. Still, she didn't feel alone. As months turned into years, stories began to spread again in Willow Creek. Some said they'd seen light flicker on the ridge on stormy nights. Others swore the ground near the river grew warmer when the wind blew from the east. The old miners told tales of the man who vanished to save the mountain, of how his heart became part of the gold itself, but no one ever spoke his name aloud. The town had learned that some memories were best kept sacred. She grew older, but the fire in her heart stayed the same. Every evening she would sit by that same window and watch the sunset spill across the valley. Sometimes she would catch the faintest shimmer of red at the horizon, like the last breath of a fading ember, and she'd smile, knowing he was still there somewhere, woven into the land, watching over her the way he always had. When her time finally came, the townsfolk found her by the hearth, her hands folded peacefully, a faint smile on her lips. Beside her cup on the table lay the same smooth stone, glowing softly as if keeping her company in her final rest. No one could explain where it had come from or how it had returned, but they buried her with it at her request, near the ridge where the wildflowers bloomed every spring. And so the legend of the miner and the woman who carried his heart became part of Willow Creek's quiet history. They said the mountain never trembled again after that day, that its shadow stretched longer and gentler across the valley, and when the wind blew through the pines at dusk, it carried with it the faint sound of a man's voice, warm, teasing, eternal, whispering, "I found the secret recipe after all." The years rolled on, and though the town changed, the ridge stood the same, holding its silence and secrets. But if you ever stood there at sunset, when the river caught fire under the last light, you might feel it too, that soft hum beneath your feet, the pulse of love and sacrifice, buried deep in the old American soil of 1885. And you'd know that some hearts once given never truly fade. They simply become part of the land that remembers them forever.